in the Circuit Court of the 18th Judicial Circuit in and for Seminole County, Florida. State of Florida versus George Zimmerman. Verdict: we, the jury, find George Zimmerman not guilty. So say we all four-person.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Kate Baldwin. It is just 6 o'clock in the East. Good morning. Great to see you this Sunday.
And I'm Chris Cuomo. Welcome to this special Sunday edition of New Day, because we're here, and obviously the big story, George Zimmerman's trial. He is a free man this morning, the long legal nightmare over at almost exactly 10 p.m. Eastern last night. After some 16 hours of deliberating, the verdict was announced. A jury of 6 women decided Zimmerman's shooting and killing of 17-year-old Trayvon Martin on a rainy winter night last year was justified. The parents of the victim in the case, never to hold their son again, heartbroken with the jury's verdict.
Zimmerman stood calmly as he heard the decision, a hint of a smile only at one point. He shook hands with his lawyers, but really remained pretty unemotional throughout, as he has throughout the murder trial. Trayvon Martin's parents, they were not in the courtroom in Sanford, Florida, when the verdict came in late last night. They do plan, they say, to attend church, though, this morning.
Nationwide protest! Nationwide protest! Nationwide!
Anticipation surrounded the verdict and the reaction to it. Outside the courtroom, what you're seeing, crowds gathered to witness the finale of the murder trial that's captivated and polarized this country. Many chanting "No justice, no peace" amid a sea of signs asking justice for Trayvon. In cities around the country, people gathered and marched in protest.
There's no way justice could have been done. As we explained, when you have an all-white jury, and you have all-white women, and you have a man, his father is a federal judge. The system has failed.
Nobody wins tonight. You know, George Zimmerman is free, but he has to come out into society living with a lot of people that necessarily don't like him.
Now, prosecutors who argued their case with very much passion, but this clearly was not the verdict that they were wanting. They accepted the verdict, they said, after it was read in press conferences afterward. They were unable, clearly, to prove, as Florida law requires, beyond a reasonable doubt that Zimmerman did not act in self-defense. Listen here.
I am disappointed, as we are with the verdict, but we accept it. We live in a great country that has a great criminal justice system. It is not perfect, but it's the best in the world. And we respect the jury's verdict.
Now, Zimmerman's attorneys had a very interesting spin on this. They said the verdict kept the tragedy, the death of a young man, from becoming a travesty, an unjust punishment of the man who killed him. They also said their client feels that he had the weight of the world lifted off his shoulders last night.
I think the prosecution of George Zimmerman was disgraceful. I am gratified by the jury's verdict, as happy as I am for George Zimmerman. I'm thrilled that this jury kept this tragedy from becoming a travesty. For that, we are eternally grateful.
And there is that line that we were talking about. Also, the word used there, disgraceful. That's how defense counsel felt about prosecution bringing this case in the first place. That's going to be something that will be judged today for sure, as we give you this broad snapshot of the George Zimmerman verdict this new day.
Now, let's get into more specifics, especially for many of your viewers who did not have the chance to stay up late last night, who are just hearing about this today. It played out late into the evening, and our correspondent, George Howell, was in Sanford, Florida. He was there alongside him, CNN legal analyst Sunny Hostin, who was also there and has been there all along, a former federal prosecutor. It's great to see you both this morning. George, just to start with you, and as I mentioned, especially for our viewers who are just waking up to this verdict this morning, explain how the emotion, the tension, the drama that really played out as we got news that a verdict had come in, and then how it played out when the verdict was read.
Absolutely. There was waiting. There was anticipation. We knew that the jury went to take a dinner break, and then after that, we expected for them to either close for the night, recess and come back the next day. Didn't really expect that that verdict would come through. And when it came through, you had people outside, just in the front lawn here. The front lawn was divided by sort of a gate, a little fence, and you had people on one side very happy. You had people on the other not so happy. And here's the thing: in the press conference that was held, I was in there and I watched the defense team and the prosecutors basically explain their reaction to that verdict. This was really interesting, very telling. There came a point where prosecutor John Guy walked over to defense attorney Don West to shake his hand. West refused to shake his hand. You remember West saying that he thought the prosecution of this case was disgraceful. There were several, Sonny, you remember, discovery violations, possible violations that, you know, the judge will deal with later after the verdict, now that we are, you know, past the verdict. But you could tell that there was definitely an animosity between the two.
And Sonny, before we've got many questions, but just on that point, I mean, we've talked about how it's an adversarial relationship, obviously, between the defense and the prosecution, but that some believe that it had kind of gone beyond that between these two sides, that there was real animosity towards the end. Is that, I mean, for our viewers who don't get to sit in courtrooms all the time, is that unusual that Don West wouldn't refuse to shake his hand?
It is unusual. I mean, certainly most attorneys that are trial lawyers, especially criminal trial lawyers, we know that it's an adversarial process because you're on both sides or opposite sides of a case, but oftentimes you're friends. After you leave the courthouse, you go to lunch together, you go to dinner together. There are people that I prosecuted cases against that we're still friends, and we still contact each other. Some of them contacted me last night after watching the coverage. So I am surprised that you see that sort of discord, and it was obvious throughout the trial, but to not shake your co-counsel or opposing counsel's hand is something that is just simply usually not done. It's frowned upon as members of the bar, and I was shocked to hear about that.
Right. And the other part of that is, you know, through the... I'm sorry.
Go ahead, George, please.
I'm sorry about that, Chris. Yeah, through the case, I remember you heard the defense team basically saying that the prosecution was playing dirty in this case, not turning over evidence in time, not giving them the amount of time to really go through it and prepare, you know, the best case for their client. So at the end, you know, it was, you know, not too surprising, but definitely stood out when you saw this prosecutor, you know, try to shake Don West's hand, and it didn't happen.
Right. Now, look, obviously the surprising thing there a little bit is the context. Forget about how lawyers get along with each other. A 17-year-old kid with no weapon was killed. To say that that's the kind of case that's going to wind up having charges brought about it is not such a surprise. Whether they had the case to make, we'll talk about all morning long. Sonny, I'll get back to you about that, and we will discuss in detail that instruction on the manslaughter charge. We talked about it yesterday. There were concerns about it, and obviously the jury shared them. We'll be back to you, George and Sonny. Thank you very much. We want to broaden this a little bit, though, into more of an understanding about the reaction with Trayvon Martin's relatives saying that they didn't want this case to be about race. That was the big issue that seemed to be in the room the entire time, right? But even their lawyer acknowledged that this issue did loom large.
And for many, the racial kind of subtext, the overtones of Trayvon Martin's death and the trial of George Zimmerman is what made this such a national story, what drew so much attention and so much passion to this case. Some of the key players, they weighed in on that issue after the verdict. Listen here.
This case has never been about race, nor has it ever been about the right to bear arms, not in the sense of proving this as a criminal case. But Trayvon Martin was profiled. There is no doubt that he was profiled to be criminal. And if race was one of the aspects in George Zimmerman's mind, then we believe that we put out the proof necessary to show that Zimmerman did profile Trayvon Martin.
I think that the things would have been different if George Zimmerman was black for this reason. He never would have been charged with a crime.
Does it bother you when people say this case is not about race?
No, it doesn't. But, you know, the whole world was looking at this case for a reason. And what people wanted to see, as we all said, how far we have come in America in matters of equal justice. And certainly, as we have said, we'll be intellectually dishonest if we didn't acknowledge the racial undertones in this case. So we have to have very responsible conversations about how we get better as a country and move forward from this tragedy and learn from it.
Yeah, I think Mr. Crump there really seizes on what's most important. If people want to dance around what's going on here, that's fine. It's up to everybody's own choice. But, you know, race played a role in people's perception of why this happened. And the idea now is, well, what do we do with this? What are the dialogues to have? Interesting to note, Angela Corey is the state attorney in Florida responsible for this case. She didn't try it, which is an interesting issue. But it is her case. She's in charge. She says we thought he was profiled, that the racial aspect there was enough that we felt confident bringing a murder charge. Something we'll talk about this morning is confident enough to bring a murder charge on that basis, but not to bring a charge that George Zimmerman picked Trayvon Martin because of his race. There's a law on the books in Florida for exactly that. They didn't charge him with that. Why not, if they were confident enough in that theory to bring a murder charge? It's something we'll discuss this morning.
And the question of racial profiling, the NAACP and many people are actually calling for the Justice Department to now look into civil charges going forward from this case. That's also something else we're going to talk about more this morning. But across the United States, across the country, as you probably well know, emotions have been running high and continue to run high this morning. In some cities, hundreds of people have gathered overnight to protest the not guilty verdict, and we've been watching that very closely.
Now, as we take a look at some of what happened, what is most remarkable may be what we have not seen. There have been rumors of potential violence, but in cities from New York to Chicago and across the Bay Area and California, there were emotional calls to action. But for the most part, so far, thankfully, peace.
What's his name? Justice for!
Victor Blackwell is in Atlanta, keeping track of the reaction for us. Victor, good morning to you, and tell us, what are you seeing down there?
Chris, Kate, good morning. We are seeing demonstrations coast to coast across the country, but what we are not seeing, as you said, is the violence. You know, the police officers, community leaders, pastors, they were all prepared for these demonstrations, and the demonstrators indeed showed up. Let's start in San Francisco.
Trayvon Martin. Justice for! Trayvon Martin. Justice for! Trayvon Martin. Justice for!
You see here police in riot gear alongside hundreds of demonstrators. They're marching through San Francisco's Mission District. The organizers called this an emergency demonstration to show their outrage in response to the not guilty verdict. You see the hundreds of people chanting, calling for justice. Police had no reason to use that riot gear. No reports of arrest. Let's go across the bay to Oakland, California. The protest started peacefully, but this is how it ended. They smashed the windows of this transit worker's car. It's a BART car, tagged it with graffiti. A CNN affiliate, KTVU, reports organizers asked the protesters to wear hoodies when they showed up. Of course, that's the garment that Trayvon Martin was wearing the night he was killed in February of 2012. They set a few small fires. They tipped a dumpster, burned a flag. Let's go now to Chicago. They're chanting justice for Trayvon Martin, not one more. Hundreds protesting in Daley Plaza. That's in downtown Chicago. Police were there to keep the peace, as they were in San Francisco, in Oakland, other cities across the country. And for the most part, peaceful in Chicago. No arrests there. No reports of arrest or violence across the country, although we did see the destruction of property. You know, there was the PSA, the public service announcement in Broward County, Chris and Kate, that was released that asked people to raise their voices and not their hands. We're going to share later some of the voices that were raised through social media, what some celebrities and just ordinary people who have followed the case have to say. Also, the protests in D.C., New York, and throughout the country. Back to you.
All right, Victor Blackwell in Atlanta for us tracking the reaction. Thanks so much. I mean,
Sure.
One thing that social media allows is for instant reaction, where you can really, people were making their voices heard on social media, Twitter, Facebook, all of the above last night, that's for sure, and that'll continue.
Very easy to be incendiary on social media also, so it's something we have to be careful about as we go forward.
Responsible conversation going forward.
Absolutely. And we're going to have a lot of emotion here, and we're also going to have a lot of complete coverage of this jury verdict in the George Zimmerman murder trial all morning long. It matters to us, but there is a lot of other stories that we have to follow as well. One in particular making news overnight. Actor Corey Monteith, star from the Fox TV show Glee, was found dead in a Vancouver hotel room Saturday.
Yeah, clearly a huge shock to so many fans of the show. Police said the cause of death wasn't immediately known, but they have, at least they believe one thing, that they have ruled out foul play. Monteith spent time in rehab earlier this year and had been public about his struggles with substance abuse. He was just 31 years old. We'll have much more on the story throughout this morning, including an exclusive interview with the guest director of Glee.
Our coverage of the verdict in the George Zimmerman case is just getting started. As we've said, there are protests.
Yeah, protests are out there. There are marches as well. This story is not over in the least. Much more still to come in our special edition of New Day. We'll be right back.